The pay was crap, but I needed the money. I've always hated night shifts. There's something about the absolute silence of the early morning that gets under my skin, like the world is just pretending to be asleep. But when I saw the ad looking for a night guard for an RV park, the pay was better than anything I could get in town, so I jumped at the chance without thinking twice. The place was out there, in the middle of nowhere, a big plot of land surrounded by thick trees, filled with trailers parked haphazardly, some with dim lights on, others completely empty. There weren't many people around. Most were travelers just passing through, staying a night or two before heading to their next stop. When I got there, I was greeted by a middle-aged man named Mr. Henderson, the camp supervisor. He was short, stocky, with deep-set eyes and a scruffy beard that seemed to suggest years of sleepless nights. His expression was stern, and he got straight to the point. The job's simple, kid. You just gotta patrol the area. Make sure the guests aren't causing trouble, and follow the rules. He then slid a crumpled piece of paper across the table. I grabbed it and started reading. At first, it seemed normal, but as my eyes moved down the list, I felt a chill run up my spine. Night shift rules. 1. Always make your first round before 10 p.m. If it's later than that, ignore anything that's out of place. Just keep going. 2. If you hear someone calling your name in the woods, ignore it. They're not talking to you. 3. Trailer number 6 always seems empty. Don't believe it. For if you see a woman in white walking around the camp, don't look directly at her. 5. The main gate must stay closed after midnight. If someone knocks and asks to come in, don't open it, even if it's someone you know. 6. If you hear the guard shack radio turning on by itself, don't try changing the frequency. Just turn it off and wait. 7. Never, ever leave the camp before dawn. I looked at Mr. Henderson, waiting for some kind of explanation. You're kidding, right? I laughed awkwardly. He just stared at me for a moment before sighing and rubbing his tired eyes. You don't need to believe it, just follow it. But what happens if I don't follow? He looked me in the eye and said something that made my stomach drop. The last guard didn't follow. We never found the body. Henderson left me alone in the small security shack with a walkie-talkie and a dim flashlight. The clock read 9:45 p.m. If I had known what was coming in the next few hours, I would have run out of there immediately. I was alone. The small shack was cramped with an old radio, a broken coffee maker, and a creaky, uncomfortable chair that groaned with every shift. The silence of the camp was almost complete, except for the occasional rustle of the trees in the wind and the distant hum of a flickering streetlight near the entrance. I glanced at the clock. 9:50 p.m. The first rule said to make my rounds before 10 p.m. I could swear Henderson had stressed that more than anything else. If it's later than that, ignore anything that's out of place. With a tightness in my chest, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The RV park was a strange place at night. During the day, it was just a cluster of trailers, some well-maintained, others covered in rust and moss. But in the dark, the place seemed warped. The trailers cast long, unsettling shadows, and the forest around it felt alive. As I walked down the gravel path, I had the strange feeling that I was being watched. 9:55 p.m. I quickened my pace. The first trailer I passed was dark. The second one had a dim light inside, and I saw an elderly man sitting at the table, drinking something warm. He looked at me, nodded politely, and went back to whatever he was doing. Nothing unusual. But then, as I approached trailer number 6, a chill ran down my spine. The light outside flickered intermittently, and the door was slightly ajar. That wasn't right. I glanced at the crumpled paper with the rules again. 3. Trailer number 6 always seems empty. Don't believe that. I knew I should keep walking, follow the rules, but the door was swaying slowly in the wind, and I heard something inside, a whisper, low, almost inaudible. Help! My heart raced. Someone was inside. I should ignore it. Henderson warned me. But what if it was someone who needed help? With a knot in my stomach, I climbed the 2 steps to the door and knocked lightly. Is anyone there? My voice came out shaky. Silence. I touched the door and it creaked as it opened a little more. The dim light revealed a small, completely empty interior. It was impossible. I was sure I had heard a voice. The smell of mold and rotten would fill my nostrils. My eyes scanned the small space. A dusty table, an old sink, a bed without a mattress. Nothing else. I took a step back, feeling a chill crawl up my neck. That's when I saw a pair of eyes watching me from under the bed. I froze, my eyes wide. The eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, completely still. They were big, deep, human, but wrong, as if they were just an empty shell, lifeless. My breath caught. Then, in a single movement, the eyes slid backward, disappearing into the darkness beneath the bed. They didn't move. They slid. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran out, tripping on the stairs and almost falling. 9:59 p.m. I took a deep breath and tried to pull myself together. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, that my nerves were playing tricks on me. But then, as I tried to catch my breath, I heard the trailer door creak slowly behind me. It was closing, by itself. I looked at the clock. 10 p.m. The rule was clear. If it's later than that, ignore anything that's out of place. From that moment on, I couldn't question anything anymore. I turned my back on the trailer and kept walking. I had broken a rule, and I knew that, sooner or later, I would pay for it. After what happened in trailer number 6, my heart didn't slow down. My body was still tense, and I could feel cold sweat running down the back of my neck. But I kept walking, because stopping meant thinking about what I had just seen. Or worse, it meant giving that thing time to realize I had seen it. The gravel trail under my feet seemed louder now, as if the sound echoed unnaturally through the silent campground. I passed the remaining trailers without looking inside. I didn't want to know what might be waiting for me in any other corner of that place. Rules. I had to follow the damn rules. Finally, after finishing the round, I went back to the guard shack. I locked the door and tried to steady my breathing. I looked at the clock, 10:08 p.m. The old radio suddenly crackled, making my heart jump in my chest. I grabbed the device with trembling fingers and turned the dial to adjust the signal. Guard shack, respond. Henderson's hoarse voice came through the static. I swallowed hard before responding. This is a newbie. I did the round. Everything's fine. Silence. After a moment, his voice came back, a bit firmer this time. Everything's fine? My mouth went dry. He knew I had stopped at trailer number 6. Yeah, I lied. Another silence. Then Henderson sighed. Listen carefully. Don't leave the shack until dawn. Not even if you hear something outside. Not even if someone knocks on the door. The line went dead right after. I kept holding the radio for a while, feeling a knot in my stomach. I wanted to believe the night would end without further incident, but when I looked out the window, I realized something had changed in the camp. The street light near trailer number 6, which had been flickering intermittently, was now completely off. And even in the darkness, I could swear I saw a silhouette standing exactly where the light used to reach. I froze completely. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stared in my direction. My fingers tightened around the radio. My instinct told me to run, to get out of there, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Whatever it was, it already knew where I was. The only thing I could do was follow the rules. Stay in the shack and wait until dawn. I tried not to look at the silhouette outside. I convinced myself that if I ignored it, maybe it would go away. But the truth? I could feel its eyes on me. The darkness of the campground seemed to stretch beyond what was natural, as if the night had thickened there. The street light didn't turn on again, and all that remained was a still silhouette. The clock read 12:14 a.m. when I finally mustered the courage to blink. My eyes were burning, fixed on the shadow that didn't move. But as soon as I blinked, it was gone. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't hear footsteps, no sound. It simply wasn't there anymore. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that it was a good sign. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was seeing things. But then, tap, tap, tap. My blood froze. Someone knocked on the guard shack door. The tips of the fingers tapped the wood 3 times, slow and deliberate. I froze. Henderson's words echoed in my head. Don't leave the guard shack until dawn. Not even if you hear something outside. Not even if someone knocks on the door. I stood still, gripping the radio tightly. Knock, knock, knock. This time louder. I shut my eyes, trying to ignore it. If I didn't open the door, maybe it would go away. But then, a voice whispered from the other side. Hey, I know you're in there. My heart nearly stopped. The voice was distorted, like several people speaking at once. Deep and high, loud and soft. I slowly backed away, trying to make no sound. The radio crackled in my hand, and I quickly turned down the volume, sweating cold. Then it spoke again. You saw me, didn't you? My stomach churned. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted anything but to be there. The knocking stopped. The silence was worse. For what felt like endless minutes, I stood there, holding my breath. And then, through the crack in the door, I saw an eye watching me. A cloudy, colorless iris, fixed on me. The thing was crouched on the other side, peering under the door. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. It whispered again. Don't worry. I know you follow the rules. The eye blinked slowly. But what if they change? I didn't know what that meant. But before I could process it, the thing was gone. No footsteps. No sound. It disappeared. And for the first time that night, I wished I had never taken that job. I didn't sleep that night. After the thing disappeared, I stayed sitting in the corner of the guard shack, holding the radio with trembling hands. Every little crack in the woods made me hold my breath. It wasn't until the first ray of sunlight pierced the window that I felt I could move again. The darkness didn't seem so oppressive, and the feeling of being watched faded away. But even with the light of day, I knew something was wrong. When I finally opened the door, I noticed a folded piece of paper on the ground. Someone had left it there. My hands were sweaty as I picked up the paper. It was a copy of the camp's rules. But one thing made me freeze. One of the rules had changed. The third line, which used to say, "Don't leave the guard shack until dawn." Now it read, "Do not leave the guard shack after midnight." Not even in the morning. My heart was pounding in my chest. It wasn't like this before. Someone had changed the rules. Or worse, something did. I swallowed hard and looked around. The camp seemed calm. The sky was clear, and the birds were singing like nothing had happened. But my whole body was screaming for me not to leave. What if it was still waiting for me? My fingers trembled as I reached for the radio. "Henderson, do you copy?" The static came first. For a second, I thought he wouldn't respond. But then, "Are you okay?" His voice sounded more tired than usual. The rule changed. My voice almost cracked. "It says I can't leave the shack in the morning." What does that mean? A tense silence filled the line. Then Henderson replied, "It means you saw something you weren't supposed to." My stomach turned. What did I see? What was that thing? Another silence, this time longer. Then he said something that made me break into a cold sweat. If the rule changed, it means they know you're here. My blood ran cold. I wanted to ask more, but the radio crackled loudly and suddenly the battery died. I looked at the display. Off. But that didn't make sense. I had charged the battery before my shift. It should have lasted for days. That's when I heard footsteps on the dirt outside. Slow, dragging. My heart raced. Carefully, I looked through the window of the guard shack. Someone was standing there. It wasn't the dark silhouette from the night before. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was wearing a uniform like mine, beige shirt, dark pants. But the fabric was dirty, like he had been dragging himself through the dirt. His face looked wrong, as if someone had tried to recreate a human face, but didn't quite get it right. His eyes were too deep. His mouth was a bit too wide. His neck looked disjointed. He was staring at me. My whole body screamed at me not to go outside. The rule had changed. Then he smiled, and I realized he was me. He had my face, my clothes, but he wasn't me. He opened his mouth and spoke with my voice. "Hey, I know you're in there." My stomach dropped. I had heard that before, the night before, from the thing that knocked on the door. And then he whispered something that made me want to vomit. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe you're the imposter here? I backed away, my legs trembling. What did that mean? My eyes fell on the camp rules again, on the new rule. Don't leave the guard shack after midnight, even in the morning. A chill ran up my spine. This wasn't a warning. It was a prison. I was trapped inside, and outside, I was waiting for myself. I didn't move. Me outside didn't move either. He just kept standing there, smiling that wrong smile. My skin tingled. I didn't know what to do. If this was some hallucination, some trick my mind was playing after a sleepless night. But I knew it wasn't. The radio was dead. The sun shone in the sky. But I still felt that same oppressive presence from before. Then he took a step forward. "You look scared," he said. The voice was identical to mine. Identical. My throat went dry. If this was real. And I knew it was. Then I was facing something that knew how I spoke, how I moved. But it wasn't perfect. He blinked a little too late. His hands were stiff, like he didn't know how to relax them. And then he said something that made me want to run. "They said you wouldn't leave, but I can come in." My body froze. He took another step. I locked the door, trying to stay calm. The guard shack was safe. At least, I thought it was. Then he raised one hand and pressed it against the window. At first glance, his fingers seemed normal. But when he pressed them against the glass, I realized they were much longer than they should be. And then he mimicked a sound that made my spine tingle. Tap, tap, tap. The knock on the door. He was mimicking exactly what had happened the night before. My lungs were burning. I was breathing too fast. Then he stopped, lowered his hand, and stared at me with those hollow eyes. "If I'm you," he said, tilting his head. "Then who's the imposter here?" That sentence. Again. And that's when I saw it. Behind him, in the window. The reflection. Not mine, but someone else's. Something tall, very tall. Standing behind him. I couldn't see it clearly. My own reflection distorted the image. But there was something there. There was always something there. The thing I saw in the woods. The thing that knocked on my door. She was right behind me outside. And he didn't know. Or maybe he did. Maybe he was waiting. My heart raced. Then, in the blink of an eye, he disappeared. The sound of the birds returned. The sun shone brighter. And outside, there was no one. Just emptiness. Just me. And the horrible feeling that I had never been alone. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the panic. Trying to convince myself that it was just a nightmare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The reflection, the smile, the feeling of being watched, even now, inside my own guard shack. It was real. It was too real. It was as if the rules I'd followed for so long, the ones I was given when I took this job, had been broken. It wasn't about what happened during the shift anymore. It wasn't about what was hiding in the camp. It was about something much deeper, something that had started long before I took my position. I should have never ignored the rules. Never. At that moment, the front door creaked open slowly, a soft groan that sliced through the heavy air. There was no more sound from the radio. The window was now completely dark, as if the night had suddenly fallen. Then it appeared again, but this time there was no imitation, no me. It was a thing, the creature that hid in the shadows, and it was watching me right in front of me. I knew I couldn't run anymore. There was nowhere left to escape. The truth was simple. The rules were broken, and now there was nothing I could do to get away. I looked at the corner of the office where the old rule sheet hung, the one I'd always ignored, the one I'd always brushed off as ridiculous, so absurd. I read it again. Never let anyone in after sunset. If you hear knocking on the door, don't open it. If you feel watched, look at the reflection. The rules don't break. Don't forget that. And it was in that moment, with the creature standing before me, that I finally understood. Those who had been there before me, the other guards, the people who had gone through the same experience, they had made the right choice. They hadn't broken the rules. And now I was being tested. The creature began to move closer. Its red eyes glowed intensely, reflecting off the broken glass of the window. I didn't know what to do anymore. Fear took over my body, paralyzing me. But deep down, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't break the rules. So I closed my eyes and did what the rule book said. Never look at the reflection. But before I could close the door completely, the final whisper cut through the air. You're never leaving here. And I already knew that.